Sometimes the most desperate moments reveal the truest character. Eli Reyes sits in the marble lobby of Vale Technologies, adjusting his second-hand tie for the 100th time. His worn briefcase contains more hope than qualifications hospital bills, eviction notices, and his daughter Luna's hand-drawn pictures of their dreams. This interview isn't just about a job, it's about survival. When CEO Margot Vale unexpectedly steps in to conduct the final interview, she sees another desperate candidate. But then Eli's ancient flip phone buzzes with a hospital emergency, and he does something that stops her cold. He chooses his daughter over his last chance at financial stability. What Margot discovers in the folder he leaves behind will challenge everything she believes about success, sacrifice, and what truly matters in life. But will a powerful CEO's awakening come too late to save a family on the brink of losing everything?
Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you.
The alarm clock's shrill cry pierced the pre-dawn darkness at 4:30 a.m., just as it had every morning for the past 3 years. Eli Reyes rolled over in the narrow bed, his hand instinctively reaching for the simple gold band on his finger. Habit that had never faded, even though Maria had been gone for 3 years now. The metal was worn from sleep, worn smooth by countless turns during moments of worry, grief, and the kind of bone-deep exhaustion that comes from carrying the world on your shoulders. In the next room, he could hear Luna's soft breathing, punctuated by the occasional wheeze that always made his heart skip a beat. At 8 years old, she had learned to sleep through the sounds of her father, preparing for another day of juggling 3 part-time jobs. But her breathing told him everything he needed to know about how she was feeling. Today was a good day steady, even breaths with only minor congestion. He whispered a prayer of gratitude to whatever force might be listening. The apartment was a study in careful economy. Every piece of furniture had been chosen for function over form, purchased second-hand or inherited from neighbors who had moved on to better circumstances. The walls bore the gentle scars of previous tenants' nail holes that had been painted over multiple times, scuff marks that spoke of other families' struggles. But Luna's artwork covered every available surface, bright splashes of color that transformed the humble space into something approaching home. Her drawings showed their dreams, a house with a garden, stick figures of a father and daughter holding hands, rainbows that seemed to promise better days ahead. Eli moved through his morning routine with the precision of someone who had learned that wasted minutes meant lost opportunities. Coffee from a can that he bought in bulk, toast from day-old bread marked down at the grocery store, and a quick check of the bills stacked neatly on the kitchen counter. The pile seemed to grow everyday medical bills from Luna's ongoing treatment, utility notices with increasingly urgent language, and the rent reminder that kept him awake most nights. Maria's recipe book sat open beside the toaster, her handwriting still clear after all these years. Eli's favorite French toast, she had written in her careful script, with detailed instructions for making breakfast special even when money was tight. He had memorized every recipe, but still turned to these pages each morning, finding comfort in the connection to the woman who had been his anchor. The morning light filtering through their east-facing window caught the dust motes dancing in the air, creating a kind of magic that Luna had always loved. She would be awake soon, and he would need to check her medications, help her with the breathing exercises that had become as routine as brushing teeth, and somehow make their modest breakfast feel like a celebration. At 6 a.m., Luna's door opened, and she emerged with her characteristic smile that never failed to lift his spirits. Her dark hair stuck up in impossible directions, and she clutched the worn stuffed elephant that had been her constant companion since her mother's death. Despite her chronic respiratory condition, despite the frequent hospital visits, despite the uncertainty that shadowed their days, Luna faced each morning with an optimism that humbled her father. "Morning, Papa," she said, her voice slightly hoarse, but bright with affection. "Did you remember to take your vitamins?" This was their daily ritual, Luna checking on him, even as he prepared to spend the day caring for everyone else's needs. She had inherited Maria's gentle nature, but possessed a strength that seemed to grow from some deep well of inner peace. Watching her navigate her challenges with such grace made Eli believe in the possibility of miracles. "I remembered," he said, lifting her into a hug that lingered a moment longer than necessary. "How are you feeling today, little star?" "Like I could fly," she said, which was her standard response on days when her breathing was clear. On difficult days, she would say she felt like resting. And Eli would know to call in sick from whatever job he could afford to miss Dot as they prepared breakfast together. Eli's mind wandered to the day ahead. He had the morning shift at the warehouse, the afternoon at the grocery store, and if he was lucky, a few hours of delivery driving in the evening. The interview at Vale Technologies had been scheduled for 2 p.m., squeezed between his regular obligations like a prayer whispered in a crowded room 20-3 floors above the city. In an office that commanded views of the entire metropolitan area, Margot Vale was already at her desk. She had been there since 5 a.m., working through reports from the Asian markets, responding to emails from investors, and reviewing the quarterly projections that would determine whether her company maintained its position as the fastest-growing tech firm in the region. At 42, Margot had built Vale Technologies from a small startup into a billion-dollar enterprise through a combination of brilliant strategic thinking, ruthless efficiency, and an almost supernatural ability to anticipate market trends. Her office reflected her personality: clean lines, expensive materials, and not a single personal photograph or memento to suggest that she had a life outside these walls. The irony wasn't lost on her that a company bearing her name felt more like home than the penthouse apartment where she spent her few sleeping hours. Here, surrounded by the constant hum of innovation and the satisfying click of deals being closed, she felt most herself. Relationships were transactions, emotions were inefficiencies, and success was measured in numbers that grew steadily larger. Each quarter. Her assistant knocked and entered with the day's schedule. "Your 2 p.m. interview has been moved up to the executive conference room," she said. "HR wants you to handle the final candidate personally." Margot frowned. She rarely conducted interviews herself, preferring to delegate such tasks to department heads who understood the specific technical requirements of each position. "What's special about this one?" "Apparently, he's interviewed for several positions over the past 6 months. Good references, but he keeps having to cancel or reschedule due to family emergencies. HR thinks a personal touch might help assess whether he's actually committed to the role." The phrase "family emergencies" triggered a familiar irritation in Margot. In her experience, people who couldn't separate their personal lives from their professional responsibilities were liabilities waiting to happen. She had built her empire by understanding that success required sacrifice, that achievement demanded the ability to prioritize the important over the merely urgent. Still, something about the situation intrigued her. In a world where most candidates came armed with polished presentations and carefully rehearsed answers, someone who had repeatedly chosen family over opportunity might offer a refreshing change of pace, even if it ultimately disqualified him from consideration. As the day progressed, both Eli and Margot moved through their separate routines, unaware that their lives were about to intersect in ways that would challenge everything they thought they knew about success, sacrifice, and the true meaning of family. The afternoon sun was climbing toward its peak, and destiny was preparing to knock on both their doors with an urgency that neither could ignore. The worn briefcase sitting by Eli's front door contained more than just hope. It held the dreams of a father who had never stopped believing that love could overcome any obstacle, and the artwork of a little girl who saw possibility in every crayon stroke. Soon, those dreams would find their way into the hands of a woman who had forgotten how to believe in anything that couldn't be measured in quarterly reports. In a few hours, 2 worlds would collide in a marble lobby, setting in motion a series of events that would prove that sometimes the most unexpected connections can create the most profound transformations. The Vale Technologies building rose like a glass monument to human ambition, its reflective surface catching the afternoon sun and throwing it back in brilliant fragments. Eli stood on the sidewalk for a moment, adjusting his tie one final time, and trying to calm the nervous energy that had been building all morning. The second-hand suit fit well enough, though he could see the subtle signs of wear that marked it as borrowed dignity. the slightly frayed cuffs, the way the fabric had begun to shine at the elbows, the careful mending where a previous owner had snagged the jacket. Inside his worn briefcase, alongside the standard resume and references, lay Luna's folder of drawings. He had meant to leave it at home, but she had insisted he take it for luck. "Show them our dreams, Papa," she had said, her small hands pressing the folder into his. "Maybe they'll want to help make them come true." The innocence of her faith both lifted his spirits and broke his heart. The lobby was an exercise in intimidation-polished marble floors that reflected the towering ceiling, abstract art that probably cost more than his annual income, and the kind of hushed atmosphere that made visitors instinctively lower their voices. Eli approached the reception desk, where a perfectly groomed woman smiled with professional warmth. "I'm here for the 2 p.m. interview," he said, surprised at how steady his voice sounded. "Eli Reyes." "Of course, Mr. Reyes. You'll be meeting with Miss Vale herself today. Please have a seat, and someone will be with you shortly." The name hit him like a physical blow. Vale, as in the company founder, the CEO whose face graced business magazines and whose quotes filled motivational articles about female leadership in tech. He had prepared for a standard interview with a department manager, not a conversation with one of the most powerful women in the industry. The nervous energy transformed into something approaching panic. He chose a chair that faced the elevators, partly for the view, but mostly because it put his back to the wall, an old habit from his construction days when situational awareness could mean the difference between safety and injury. The briefcase sat in his lap, its familiar weight grounding him as he watched the controlled chaos of a major corporation in motion. 15 minutes later, the elevator doors opened to reveal a woman who commanded attention without effort. Margot Vale moved with the confidence of someone accustomed to being the smartest person in any room, her tailored suit a masterpiece of understated elegance. She was younger than he had expected, with sharp features softened by intelligent eyes that seemed to catalog everything they encountered. "Mr. Reyes?" Her voice carried the crisp authority of someone who had learned to make every word count. "I'm Margot Vale. Thank you for your patience." The handshake was firm but brief, and he found himself following her toward a conference room that probably cost more to furnish than most people's cars. The walls were lined with awards and recognitions, testaments to a career built on measurable achievements. She gestured to a chair across from her, and he settled into leather that whispered of luxury. "I've reviewed your application," she began, opening a tablet that displayed his information. "Your background is interesting: construction management, warehouse operations, retail supervision. You're applying for a position in our facilities management department. What draws you to Vale Technologies?" The question he had rehearsed a dozen times suddenly felt inadequate. Sitting across from Margot Vale, he found himself abandoning his prepared answers in favor of something more honest. "I need stable work with benefits," he said. "My daughter has a chronic respiratory condition, and I've been piecing together part-time jobs to cover her medical expenses. I know I don't have traditional corporate experience, but I understand hard work. I show up when I say I will, and I learn quickly." Something flickered in her expression, surprise, perhaps at his directness. "Tell me about your daughter." "Luna. She's 8. His voice softened instinctively. "She's been dealing with lung issues since she was 5. Frequent infections, breathing difficulties. The doctors say it's manageable with proper treatment, but proper treatment costs money I don't have. And her mother died 3 years ago. Car accident." The words came out flat, protected by the emotional armor he had built around the subject. "It's just Luna and me now." Margot leaned back in her chair, and for a moment, something almost vulnerable crossed her features. "That must be incredibly difficult." "It is, but she's the strongest person I know. She makes me want to be better than I am." They talked for another 20 minutes, covering his work history, his approach to problem solving, his availability for different shifts. What struck him most was how she listened, not just to his words, but to the meaning behind them. Unlike other interviews where he had felt like he was performing for judges, this felt more like a conversation between two people trying to understand each other. Then his phone buzzed. The sound cut through the professional atmosphere like an N. Alarm. Eli's face went pale as he looked at the display St. Mary's Hospital, a number he had memorized and dreaded in equal measure. Luna's school had strict instructions to call the hospital first in case of emergency, and the hospital had his number as the primary contact. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice tight with sudden fear. "This is the hospital. I have to, of course." "Take it." His hand shook slightly as he answered. "This is Eli Reyes." "Mr. Reyes, this is Dr. Martinez at St. Mary's. Luna is having some breathing difficulties. We need you to come in right away." The world narrowed to a single point of focus. Everything else, the interview, the job opportunity, the bills waiting at home, became irrelevant in the face of his daughter's need. "I'm on my way." He ended the call and stood abruptly, his mind already racing through the logistics of getting across town in afternoon traffic. "I have to go," he said, gathering his briefcase with hands that moved on autopilot. "My daughter, she's in the hospital." "I'm sorry. I know this looks unprofessional, but I have to go," Margot said firmly. "Go to your daughter. Thank you. Thank you for understanding." He was already moving toward the door, his thoughts consumed by images of Luna struggling to breathe, of hospital machines and worried medical staff. In his haste, he knocked over the briefcase, sending papers scattering across the polished table. "I'm sorry. I'll clean this up. Don't worry about it. Go." He grabbed what he thought were his documents and hurried out, leaving Margot alone in the conference room, surrounded by the debris of an interrupted interview. She began gathering the scattered papers, intending to have them sent to him later, when she noticed that not all of them were standard resume materials. A piece of construction paper caught her attention, bright yellow with a drawing in colored pencils. She picked it up, studying the careful artwork that showed a small house with a garden, 2 stick figures holding hands, and a son with an impossibly large smile. At the bottom, in a child's careful handwriting, were the words, "Me and Papa's dream house." Another drawing showed a family of 3 larger figures, and a smaller one in the middle, all with oversized smiles and arms outstretched toward each other. This one was labeled, "Our Happy Family," with a heart drawn in red crayon. There were more pictures of gardens and playgrounds, of a father and daughter having picnics, of dreams rendered in the hopeful colors of childhood. Each one signed with Luna in letters that grew more confident as the stack progressed. Margot found herself studying each drawing with increasing fascination. When had she last seen such pure optimism? When had she last believed that happiness could be captured in colored pencils and construction paper? The artwork spoke of a world where love was the only currency that mattered, where a father's presence was worth more than any material possession. At the bottom of the stack was a letter, written in the same careful handwriting. "Dear Papa, I drew these pictures for you to remember that we are already rich because we have each other. When you get the new job, maybe we can have a garden and I can help you plant flowers. I love you more than all the stars. Love, Luna." Margot set the letter down carefully, her hands trembling slightly. She had spent the past 20 years building an empire based on the belief that success meant accumulating power, wealth, and influence. But this little girl's definition of richness, having each other challenged everything she thought she knew about what mattered in life. She walked to the window, looking out at the city spread below. Somewhere out there, a father was racing through traffic to reach his daughter's bedside, carrying nothing but love and the desperate hope that it would be enough. And here she sat, surrounded by the trappings of conventional success, holding artwork that suggested she might have been measuring her life with the wrong ruler entirely. The afternoon sun was beginning its descent, casting long shadows across the conference room. Margot gathered Luna's drawings carefully, placing them back in the folder with the reverence usually reserved for important contracts. But perhaps these were the most important documents she had ever handled, evidence of a kind of wealth that no quarterly report could quantify. For the first time in years, she found herself wondering what her own childhood drawings might have looked like, before ambition had replaced dreams, before success had become synonymous with solitude. The little girl who had once believed in happy endings had grown into a woman who measured victory in market share and profit margins. As she prepared to leave the conference room, Margot made a decision that surprised even her. She would find a way to return this folder to Eli Reyes, and perhaps in doing so, she might discover something she hadn't even realized she had lost. The hospital corridor smelled of disinfectant and hope, a combination that had become achingly familiar to Eli over the past 3 years. His feet moved automatically toward the pediatric ward, muscle memory guiding him through turns and doorways, while his mind remained focused on the terrifying possibilities that always accompanied these emergency calls. The 20-minute drive across town had felt like hours, traffic lights seeming to conspire against him as precious seconds ticked away. He found Luna in room 314, connected to monitors that beeped reassuringly, but still made his stomach clench with worry. She was sitting up in bed, her breathing aided by a clear plastic mask that covered her nose and mouth. Her eyes brightened when she saw him, and she lifted one small hand in greeting, a gesture made awkward by the IV line taped to her wrist. "Papa," she said, her voice muffled but audible through the oxygen mask. "I'm okay. Dr. Martinez said it was just a little flare-up." Dr. Martinez looked up from her chart, offering Eli the kind of smile that medical professionals perfected, reassuring but honest. Elena Martinez had been Luna's pulmonologist for 2 years, and she had learned to read the complex emotions that played across a parent's face during these visits. "She's stable," Dr. Martinez said, anticipating his first question. "We caught it early this time. Her oxygen levels dropped during recess at school, but they're improving with treatment. We'll keep her overnight for observation, but she should be able to go home tomorrow if everything continues trending upward." Eli sank into the chair beside Luna's bed, relief making his legs suddenly weak. What triggered it this time? Could be any number of factors. Changes in weather, exposure to allergens, just the natural progression of her condition. The important thing is that her response to treatment remains strong. Luna reached for his hand, her small fingers intertwining with his. Even through the medical equipment and the clinical setting, her touch carried the same comfort it always had. She was his anchor, the force that kept him grounded when everything else felt like it was spinning out of control. "How was your interview, Papa?" she asked, her eyes curious despite her fatigue. "Did you tell them about our dreams?" The interview felt like it had happened in another lifetime, though only an hour had passed since he had fled the Vale Technologies building. "We didn't finish talking," he said carefully. "I had to leave when the hospital called." "Oh," Luna's face fell slightly. "I'm sorry I ruined your job chance." "Hey," Eli leaned closer, his voice gentle but firm. "You didn't ruin anything. You're the most important thing in my world, Luna. Jobs come and go, but you're irreplaceable." As they talked, Eli's mind wandered to Maria's final days in a room much like this one. She had made him promise that Luna would always come first, that he would never let pride or fear prevent him from doing whatever was necessary to care for their daughter. It was a promise that had guided every decision he had made since, even when those decisions came at significant personal cost. Maria's recipe book was tucked in his jacket pocket. He had taken to carrying it during hospital visits, finding comfort in the connection to the woman who had taught him that love was measured not in grand gestures, but in daily acts of care. Her handwritten notes in the margins seemed to whisper encouragement during the most difficult moments. "Papa, did you bring the folder with my pictures?" Luna asked suddenly. Eli's heart sank as he realized what he had left behind in his hasty departure. "I think I left it at the office building, sweetheart. I was in such a hurry to get to you." "That's okay," Luna said with characteristic generosity. "Maybe whoever finds it will like our dreams. Maybe they'll want to help make them come true." Her optimism, unwavering even in the face of disappointment, reminded Eli why he fought so hard to create a stable life for them. Luna had inherited Maria's ability to see possibility where others saw only problems, to find hope in the smallest kindness. As evening approached, Eli settled into the familiar routine of a hospital vigil. The nursing staff knew him by name, and they had stopped asking whether he needed anything. He had learned to pack a small bag with books, snacks, and the kind of patience that came from practice. Luna dozed fitfully, her breathing gradually becoming easier as the medications took effect. During the quiet hours, Eli found himself thinking about the interview that had been so abruptly interrupted. Margot Vale had surprised him with her genuine interest in his story, her willingness to listen without judgment. Most potential employers saw his situation as a liability, single father whose personal responsibilities might interfere with professional obligations. But she had seemed to understand that his devotion to Luna was a strength, not a weakness. The memory of her expression when he mentioned Luna's condition stuck with him. For just a moment, the polished executive facade had slipped, revealing something almost vulnerable. It made him wonder about her own story, the experiences that had shaped her into the formidable businesswoman she had become. Meanwhile, across the city, Margot sat in her office long after her staff had gone home. Luna's drawings spread across her desk like colorful accusations. The artwork seemed to challenge every assumption she had made about success, family, and the choices that defined a life worth living. She had tried to return to her normal evening routine, reviewing reports, planning the next day's meetings, analyzing market trends that would influence strategic decisions. But her attention kept drifting back to the folder that Eli had left behind, to the innocent dreams captured in crayon and colored pencil. One drawing in particular haunted her. Picture of 3 figures holding hands beneath a rainbow, labeled "My Family" in Luna's careful letters. The third figure was clearly meant to be Maria, depicted with the kind of loving detail that spoke of a child's desperate desire to keep her mother's memory alive. But what struck Margot most was the complete absence of anger or bitterness in Nausch. The artwork. Despite loss, despite illness, despite financial struggle, Luna's pictures radiated pure joy. It forced Margot to confront a question she had spent years avoiding. When had she last felt that kind of uncomplicated happiness? When had she last created something simply for the joy of creation, without calculating its market value or strategic importance? Her own childhood seemed like a distant country, one whose customs she could barely remember. There had been a time when she too had drawn pictures of impossible dreams, when her biggest worry was whether her father would remember to pick her up from school on time. But those memories felt like they belonged to someone else, buried beneath layers of ambition and carefully constructed emotional armor. The janitor's quiet knock interrupted her brooding. "Working late again, Miss Vale?" "Just finishing up some important documents," she said, carefully gathering Luna's drawings. And they were important. She realized, perhaps more important than any contract she had ever signed or deal she had ever closed. As she prepared to leave the office, Margot made a decision that would have surprised anyone who knew her professional reputation. She would find a way to return the folder to Eli Reyes, and in the process, perhaps she would discover what it felt like to prioritize someone else's dreams over her own ambitions. The night sky stretched over the city, connecting a hospital room where a father kept vigil beside his daughter's bed to a corporate office where a successful woman questioned everything she thought she knew about the meaning of wealth. Tomorrow would bring new challenges for both of them, but tonight, in their separate spaces, they were united by the unexpected ways that fate could redirect even the most carefully planned lives. The next morning brought the kind of crisp clarity that often follows storms, both meteorological and emotional. Luna's breathing had stabilized overnight, and Dr. Martinez pronounced her ready for discharge with the usual litany of precautions and follow-up instructions. Eli helped his daughter gather her few belongings, grateful beyond words for another successful treatment, another crisis navigated safely. "Papa, can we stop for ice cream on the way home?" Luna asked as they waited for the discharge paperwork. Her recovery always amazed him, the resilience that allowed her to bounce back from episodes that left him emotionally drained. "I think we can manage that," he said, though he was already calculating the cost against their dwindling bank account. Some expenses were necessities that couldn't be measured in dollars. They were preparing to leave when a woman appeared in the doorway, holding a familiar manila folder. Eli's breath caught as he recognized Margot Vale, though she looked different outside the corporate setting, more approachable, somehow more human. She wore jeans and a simple sweater, her hair pulled back in a casual ponytail that made her appear younger than her business attire had suggested. "Mr. Reyes?" she said tentatively. "I hope I'm not intruding." I wanted to return this. Luna looked up from her coloring book, her eyes widening with curiosity. Papa, is that the important lady from your job interview? This is Miss Vale, Eli said, unsure of the proper etiquette for the situation. Miss Vale, this is my daughter Luna. Hello, Luna, Margot said, her voice softer than Eli remembered. I brought back your drawings. They're quite beautiful. There was an awkward moment as the three of them navigated the unexpected encounter. Margot had prepared herself for a simple handoff, return the folder, perhaps offer some polite words about the interview process, and return to her familiar world of boardrooms and strategic planning. But standing in the pediatric ward, faced with Luna's genuine smile and the obvious love between father and daughter, she found her rehearsed words inadequate. Are you a doctor? Luna asked with the directness that only children possessed. No, I work in an office building. Your father came to talk to me about a job yesterday. Oh? Did you like our dream pictures? Papa was supposed to show them to you for luck. Margot glanced at Eli, who looked embarrassed by his daughter's innocent revelation. I did see them, she said carefully. You're a very talented artist. Thank you. Do you want to see my new one? I drew it last night while Papa was sleeping in the chair. Luna held up her latest creation, a hospital room rendered in bright colors, with stick figures representing herself, her father, and several medical staff members, all smiling despite the clinical setting. The drawing hit Margot with unexpected force. Even in a hospital bed, connected to monitors and breathing equipment, Luna had found something worth celebrating. The picture radiated the same irrepressible optimism as her other artwork, transforming a moment of crisis into a scene of caring. Connection. It's wonderful, Margot said, and meant it. You have a gift for seeing the bright side of things. Mama always said that every day has something good in it. You just have to look for it, Luna replied. Even the scary days. A nurse entered to finalize the discharge process, creating a natural break in the conversation. As the paperwork was completed, Margot found herself reluctant to leave the hospital environment, which she had expected to find depressing, instead felt alive with purpose and genuine human connection. She watched the staff interact with Luna, noting the easy affection that spoke of relationships built over multiple visits. Ms. Vale, Eli said quietly, while Luna was distracted by the nurse's questions, I want to apologize for yesterday. Running out like that. Don't apologize, she interrupted. You made the right choice. Your daughter needed you. Still, it wasn't professional. I understand if the position has been filled. Before Margot could respond, Luna looked up from her conversation with the nurse. Miss Vale, do you have any children? The question struck deeper than Margot had expected. No, I don't. Would you like to color with me sometime? I could teach you how to draw happiness. It's one of my specialties. The offer, made with such genuine enthusiasm, left Margot momentarily speechless. When had anyone last invited her to simply play? When had her value to another person been measured not in what she could provide professionally, but in her willingness to share time and attention? I might like that. She found herself saying that as they left the hospital together. Walking toward the parking garage, Margot's mind raced with questions she couldn't quite articulate. Something about this father and daughter challenged assumptions she had held for so long they felt like fundamental truths. Their obvious love for each other, their ability to find joy despite circumstances that would crush most people's spirits, forced her to examine her own life with uncomfortable honesty. In her car, she sat for several minutes before starting the engine, studying the photo on her dashboard, a corporate headshot that had been taken for a business magazine cover. The woman in the photo looked successful, confident, completely in control. But she also looked alone in a way that Margot was only beginning to recognize. Her phone buzzed with a text from her assistant. Board meeting moved to 4 p.m. Legal needs your review on the Morrison contract. Marketing wants approval on Q3 campaign. Budget. The familiar rhythm of corporate demands felt oddly hollow after the morning's encounter. Instead of heading directly to the office, Margot found herself driving slowly through the city, taking routes she hadn't traveled in years. She passed parks where families gathered for weekend activities, cafes where people lingered over conversations that had nothing to do with profit margins, schools where children's laughter echoed from playgrounds. When had she last noticed these scenes of ordinary happiness? When had she last participated in the kind of simple human connections that seemed to sustain other people's spirits? A memory surfaced from her childhood, herself at Luna's age, sitting in a hospital room while her mother recovered from surgery. She had drawn pictures then too, trying to make sense of frightening medical equipment and adult conversations filled with worried whispers. But unlike Luna's artwork, her drawings had been dark, filled with angular figures and storm clouds. Her parents had meant well, but they had treated her illness as a crisis to be managed rather than an experience to be shared. They had focused on medical protocols and insurance coverage while missing the emotional needs of a frightened little girl. Recovery had been measured in test results and discharge dates, not in moments of connection or reassurance. Perhaps that was when she had learned to equate love with practical solutions, to believe that caring for someone meant solving their problems rather than simply being present with them. It was a lesson that had served her well in business, but left her isolated in ways she was only beginning to understand. By the time she reached her office, Margot had made a decision that surprised even her. She would find a way to see Luna again, to understand how this remarkable little girl had maintained such radiant hope despite facing challenges that would break most adults. And perhaps, in learning Luna's secret, she might rediscover something precious that she had lost along the way to success. 3 days after their chance encounter at the hospital, Margot found herself standing in the lobby of St. Mary's with a box of art supplies and a growing sense that she was stepping into unfamiliar territory. She had told herself this was simply a gesture of goodwill, returning a favor to someone who had inadvertently taught her something about priorities. But the truth was more complicated, involving emotions she hadn't allowed herself to feel in years. The volunteer coordinator, a cheerful woman named Mrs. Patterson, greeted her with the kind of enthusiasm usually reserved for lottery winners. "Ms. Vale, what a wonderful surprise. Luna has been talking about you nonstop since your visit. She's in the art therapy room if you'd like to join today's session." The pediatric wing buzzed with controlled activity nurses making rounds, parents juggling coffee cups and worried expressions, children adapting to an environment that adults found overwhelming. Margot followed Mrs. Patterson through corridors decorated with bright murals, past rooms where young patients dealt with challenges that put her corporate problems into stark perspective. She found Luna at a small table, surrounded by other children, and overseen by an art therapist who introduced herself as Sarah. Luna's face lit up when she spotted Margot, and she waved with a kind of unguarded enthusiasm that made several other children look up curiously. "Ms. Vale, you came. Look, I'm making a picture of all the people who helped me feel better." Luna held up a drawing that featured a remarkable array of stick figures, each labeled with names and roles: doctors, nurses, her father, and surprisingly, a figure labeled "My new friend, Miss Margot." The inclusion in Luna's circle of important people touched Margot more deeply than any business recognition ever had. "That's beautiful, Luna. Would you mind if I tried drawing too?" "Of course. Here, sit next to me. What do you want to draw?" Margot settled into the child-sized chair, feeling awkward but determined. "I'm not sure. What do you think I should draw?" "Draw something that makes you happy," Luna suggested with the confidence of an expert. "Even if it's something small. Mama used to say that happiness comes in all sizes, and the small ones are just as important as the big ones." The other children had gradually warmed to Margot's presence, curious about the adult who was willing to color alongside them. 7-year-old Marcus, recovering from surgery to repair a congenital heart defect, offered her his favorite blue crayon. 10-year-old Ashley, undergoing treatment for juvenile arthritis, showed her techniques for making clouds look more realistic. As Margot attempted her first drawing in decades, she found herself listening to conversations that revealed wisdom far beyond the speaker's ears. These children discussed their medical conditions with matter-of-fact acceptance, supported each other through difficult treatments, and celebrated small victories with genuine joy. Their resilience humbled her. "What are you drawing?" Luna asked. peering at Margot's hesitant efforts. "I think it's a garden," Margot said, surprised by her own choice. "I haven't thought about gardens in a long time." "I love gardens. Papa and I want to have one someday, with flowers and vegetables, and maybe a tree for climbing. Do you have a garden?" "No, I live in an apartment. High up, with windows, but no soil." The description sounded sterile even to her own ears. "That sounds lonely," Luna said with characteristic directness. "Gardens are better when they're shared. Maybe you could visit our garden when we get one." The casual invitation, offered without expectation or agenda, made Margot's chest tighten with emotion she couldn't quite name. When had anyone last invited her to share something simply for the pleasure of her company? As the art session continued, Margot found herself drawn into the children's world in ways that surprised her. She helped Ashley mix colors for a sunset scene, listened to Marcus explain his elaborate superhero comic strip, and gradually relaxed into the unhurried rhythm of creative play. Luna worked steadily on a new project, large drawing that seemed to grow more complex with each edition. "It's a map," she explained when Margot asked. "A map of all the places I want to go when I'm better. See, here's the beach where Papa and I will build sandcastles, and here's the mountain where we'll see eagles, and this is the library where I'll read every book about adventures." The drawing revealed both Luna's dreams and her practical approach to hope. She wasn't wishing for an instant cure or magical transformation. She was planning for a future where her condition would be managed well enough to allow for exploration and wonder. "You thought this through carefully," Margot observed. "Papa says planning makes dreams more likely to come true. He's been saving money for our adventures, even though I know it's hard." Luna's voice carried both pride in her father's efforts and awareness of their financial limitations. After the art session ended, Margot found herself reluctant to leave. She helped clean up supplies, said goodbye to the other children, and walked with Luna toward the elevator where Eli was waiting. He looked tired but smiled warmly when he saw them approaching together. "How was the session?" he asked Luna. "Ms. Margot drew a garden, and she's really good at coloring inside the lines. Can she come back next week?" Eli looked at Margot with a mixture of gratitude and uncertainty. "You don't have to. I mean, I'm sure you're very busy." "I'd like to come back," Margot said, surprising herself with how much she meant it. "If that's all right with both of you." As they waited for Eli's bus to arrive, Luna chattered about her artwork and the other children's projects, her enthusiasm infectious. Margot found herself asking questions about Luna's treatments, her school experience, her favorite books and activities. The conversation felt natural in a way that most of her social interactions didn't. "Ms. Margot," Luna said as the bus approached, "do you think dreams can come true even when they seem really hard?" "I think," Margot said carefully, "that some dreams come true in ways we don't expect. And sometimes helping other people's dreams come true helps our own dreams grow." "That's a really smart answer," Luna said approvingly. "I think Mama would have liked you." As she watched the bus carry them away, Margot realized that something fundamental had shifted in her understanding of value and purpose. The afternoon had been more rewarding than most of her business achievements, more satisfying than closing deals worth millions of dollars. That evening, she sat in her penthouse apartment, looking out at the city lights and thinking about Luna's map of future adventures. Her own life suddenly seemed constrained, despite its apparent freedom bounded by conference rooms and strategic plans, limited by assumptions about what constituted meaningful work. She pulled out her laptop and began researching childhood respiratory conditions, treatment options, and the kind of financial challenges that families like Eli's faced. What she discovered made her angry in ways that quarterly reports never could. Children were rationing medications because of cost. Families were choosing between medical care and basic needs. Parents were working multiple jobs while trying to provide the emotional support their children needed. For the first time in years, Margot found herself thinking about problems that couldn't be solved with market analysis or strategic positioning. These were human problems that required human solutions, empathy, time, and the kind of sustained commitment that went beyond professional obligations. As she prepared for bed, she made a decision that would have seemed impossible just a week ago. She cleared her schedule for the following Wednesday afternoon, blocking out time for what her calendar would show as community engagement activities. But she knew it was really something much simpler and more complicated time spent learning how to be human again from a little girl who had never forgotten. The eviction notice arrived on a Tuesday morning, as cold and impersonal as the October wind that rattled their apartment windows. Eli stared at the official document, reading the same words multiple times as if repetition might change their meaning. 30 days. They had 30 days to find $2,400 in back rent or face removal from the only home Luna had known since her mother's death. He had been juggling bills with the precision of a circus performer, paying just enough to each creditor to avoid immediate crisis while Luna's medical expenses continued to mount. But the respiratory infection 3 weeks ago had required an emergency room visit and additional medications. Throwing his careful calculations into chaos. Luna emerged from her bedroom, already dressed for school and carrying her backpack with the careful independence she had developed over the past year. "Morning, Papa. Did the mail bring anything good?" Eli folded the notice quickly, slipping it beneath the stack of other bills on the kitchen counter. "Just the usual stuff, little star. Are you feeling okay this morning? Good breathing day?" She confirmed, taking her morning medications without complaint. The routine had become as automatic as brushing teeth, another adaptation to circumstances that no 8-year-old should have to master. As he prepared her breakfast toast with the last of their peanut butter, orange juice watered down to make it last longer, Eli's mind raced through increasingly desperate calculations. His 3 part-time jobs brought in enough to cover basic expenses and minimum payments on medical debt. But there was no margin for emergencies or catch-up payments. The interview at Vale Technologies felt like a distant memory now, filed away, with other opportunities that had evaporated due to circumstances beyond his control. He had followed up with a polite email explaining his abrupt departure, but had received only an automated response acknowledging receipt of his message. "Papa, you look worried," Luna observed with the perceptiveness that sometimes unsettled him. "Is it something I did?" "No, sweetheart, never. Just adult stuff that doesn't concern you. Mama used to say that family stuff concerns everyone in the family, even the little people." Luna's voice carried the gentle authority that came from quoting her mother's wisdom. Eli knelt beside her chair, taking her small hands in his work-roughened ones. "You're right. We might need to move to a different apartment soon. Somewhere less expensive. But I like this apartment. My art corner has good light, and Mrs. Chun next door always asks about my breathing." Luna's expression grew thoughtful rather than upset. "Would we still be together? Always. As long as I'm breathing, we're together. Then it'll be okay," she said with the kind of faith that broke his heart and mended it simultaneously. Adventures can happen anywhere. After Luna left for school, Eli sat at their small kitchen table and spread out the bills that had been haunting his sleep. Medical debt, $8,400 and growing. Utilities, past due but not yet shut off. Car insurance, canceled last month to free up money for groceries. And now the eviction notice, demanding payment he simply didn't have. He had applied for assistance programs, but the waiting lists were long and the requirements complex. His pride had initially prevented him from seeking help from Maria's family, but pride was a luxury he could no longer afford. He reached for his phone to call Maria's sister, knowing she would help if she could, but also knowing her own family's finances were stretched thin. Meanwhile, at Vale Technologies, Margot was experiencing a different kind of crisis. The board meeting had devolved into thinly veiled criticism of her recent distraction from core business objectives. Her weekly visits to the hospital, while personally meaningful, had not gone unnoticed by colleagues who measured commitment in hours spent at the office. "We're concerned about your focus, Margot," board member William Harrison said during what was supposed to be a routine quarterly review. "The Morrison acquisition requires your full attention, and there are reports that you've been involved in charitable activities during business hours." "The Morrison deal is proceeding on schedule," Margot replied, though she knew her recent preoccupation with Luna's situation had affected her usual laser focus on corporate matters. My time management remains efficient. Nevertheless, leadership requires certain sacrifices. Personal interests, however admirable, cannot supersede professional responsibilities. The conversation continued in the coded language of corporate politics, but the message was clear. Return to the single-minded dedication that had built her career, or face consequences that could threaten her position. That afternoon, driving toward the hospital for her weekly visit with Luna, Margot found herself torn between two increasingly incompatible worlds. The child who had taught her to find joy in colored pencils and construction paper seemed to exist in a different universe from the boardroom, where she fought for market share and quarterly growth. She arrived at the hospital to find Luna in the art therapy room, working on what appeared to be an architectural drawing. The careful lines and detailed annotations suggested serious thought behind the colorful design. "Ms. Margot, look what I'm making. It's our new apartment building. Papa says we might be moving soon, so I'm designing the perfect place for families who need good air and lots of windows for sunshine." The drawing showed a multi-story building with large windows, rooftop gardens, and ground floor spaces labeled community room and children's play area. Each apartment was designed with specific features: air filtration systems, accessible ramps, and what Luna had labeled healing gardens on every balcony. "This is remarkable, Luna. You've thought of everything." I asked Dr. Martinez what would make the perfect place for kids like me to live, and then I drew it. Maybe someday someone will build it for real. As Luna explained each feature of her design, Margot felt something crystallizing in her mind, an idea that connected her business expertise with the human problems she had been learning about through Luna's experiences. "Luna, what if I told you that someone might be interested in building something like this?" "Really? You know someone who makes buildings?" Before Margot could answer, Eli appeared in the doorway, his usually cheerful demeanor shadowed by worry. Luna immediately noticed the change in her father's expression, her own face growing serious. "Papa, what's wrong?" Eli glanced at Margot, clearly uncomfortable discussing private matters in front of someone who was still essentially a stranger, despite their growing friendship. "Just some paperwork stuff, little star. Nothing for you to worry about." But Luna's perceptiveness wouldn't be dismissed so easily. "Is it about our apartment?" The question hung in the air, and Margot saw Eli's internal struggle between protecting his daughter from adult concerns and respecting her intelligence. She also recognized an opportunity to offer help without damaging his pride. "Eli," she said carefully, "I've been learning a lot about housing challenges for families dealing with medical conditions. If there's anything I could do to help, even just connecting you with resources." "We'll manage," he said automatically, but his voice carried the strain of someone who wasn't sure how. "I know you will, but sometimes managing is easier when you have people in your corner." Luna looked between the two adults, seeming to understand more than either of them realized. "Papa, remember what Mama said about accepting help gracefully? She said it lets other people practice being kind." The wisdom of an 8-year-old, spoken in her mother's words, created a moment of silence that felt almost sacred. In that pause, 3 people who had entered each other's lives by accident began to understand that some connections transcend circumstance, creating possibilities that none of them could achieve alone. As the afternoon visit continued, an unspoken understanding began to develop. Margot had resources and business expertise. Eli had experience with the challenges that families like his faced daily. Luna had the vision to imagine solutions that adults, constrained by practical limitations, might never consider. By the time Margot left the hospital that evening, she had made a decision that would require her to choose between the safe path of conventional success and the uncertain territory of meaningful change. But for the first time in her career, the choice felt obvious. The eviction notice arrived on a Tuesday morning, as cold and impersonal as the October wind that rattled their apartment windows. Eli stared at the official document, reading the same words multiple times as if repetition might change their meaning. 30 days. They had 30 days to find $2,400 in back rent or face removal from the only home Luna had known since her mother's death. He had been juggling bills with the precision of a circus performer, paying just enough to each creditor to avoid immediate crisis, while Luna's medical expenses continued to mount. But the respiratory infection 3 weeks ago had required an emergency room visit and additional medications. Throwing his careful calculations into chaos, Luna emerged from her bedroom, already dressed for school and carrying her backpack with the careful independence she had developed over the past year. "Morning, Papa. Did the mail bring anything good?" Eli folded the notice quickly, slipping it beneath the stack of other bills on the kitchen counter. "Just the usual stuff, little star. Are you feeling okay this morning?" "Good breathing day," she confirmed, taking her morning medications without complaint. The routine had become as automatic as brushing teeth, another adaptation to circumstances that no 8-year-old should have to master. As he prepared her breakfast toast with the last of their peanut butter, orange juice watered down to make it last longer, Eli's mind raced through increasingly desperate calculations. His 3 part-time jobs brought in enough to cover basic expenses and minimum payments on medical debt, but there was no margin for emergencies or catch-up payments. The interview at Vale Technologies felt like a distant memory now, filed away, with other opportunities that had evaporated due to circumstances beyond his control. He had followed up with a polite email explaining his abrupt departure, but had received only an automated response acknowledging receipt of his message. "Papa, you look worried," Luna observed with a perceptiveness that sometimes unsettled him. "Is it something I did?" "No, sweetheart, never. Just adult stuff that doesn't concern you. Mama used to say that family stuff concerns everyone in the family, even the little people." Luna's voice carried the gentle authority that came from quoting her mother's wisdom. Eli knelt beside her chair, taking her small hands in his work-roughened ones. "You're right. We might need to move to a different apartment soon. Somewhere less expensive. But I like this apartment. My art corner has good light, and Mrs. Chun next door always asks about my breathing." Luna's expression grew thoughtful rather than upset. "Would we still be together? Always? As long as I'm breathing, we're together. Then it'll be okay," she said with a kind of faith that broke his heart and mended it simultaneously. Adventures can happen anywhere. After Luna left for school, Eli sat at their small kitchen table and spread out the bills that had been haunting his sleep. Medical debt, $8,400 and growing. Utilities, past due but not yet shut off. Car insurance, canceled last month to free up money for groceries. And now the eviction notice, demanding payment he simply didn't have. He had applied for assistance programs, but the waiting lists were long and the requirements complex. His pride had initially prevented him from seeking help from Maria's family, but pride was a luxury he could no longer afford. He reached for his phone to call Maria's sister, knowing she would help if she could, but also knowing her own family's finances were stretched thin. Meanwhile, at Vale Technologies, Margot was experiencing a different kind of crisis. The board meeting had devolved into thinly veiled criticism of her recent distraction from core business objectives. Her weekly visits to the hospital, while personally meaningful, had not gone unnoticed by colleagues who measured commitment in hours spent at the office. "We're concerned about your focus, Margot," board member William Harrison said during what was supposed to be a routine quarterly review. "The Morrison acquisition requires your full attention, and there are reports that you've been involved in charitable activities during business hours." "The Morrison deal is proceeding on schedule," Margot replied, though she knew her recent preoccupation with Luna's situation had affected her usual laser focus on corporate matters. "My time management remains efficient. Nevertheless, leadership requires certain sacrifices. Personal interests, however admirable, cannot supersede professional responsibilities." The conversation continued in the coded language of corporate politics, but the message was clear. Return to the single-minded dedication that had built her career, or face consequences that could threaten her position. That afternoon, driving toward the hospital for her weekly visit with Luna, Margot found herself torn between 2 increasingly incompatible worlds. The child who had taught her to find joy in colored pencils and construction paper seemed to exist in a different universe from the boardroom, where she fought for market share and quarterly growth. She arrived at the hospital to find Luna in the art therapy room, working on what appeared to be an architectural drawing. The careful lines and detailed annotations suggested serious thought behind the colorful design. "Ms. Margot, look what I'm making. It's our new apartment building. Papa says we might be moving soon, so I'm designing the perfect place for families who need good air and lots of windows for sunshine." The drawing showed a multi-story building with large windows, rooftop gardens, and ground floor spaces labeled community room and children's play area. Each apartment was designed with specific features: air filtration systems, accessible ramps, and what Luna had labeled healing gardens on every balcony. "This is remarkable, Luna. You've thought of everything. I asked Dr. Martinez what would make the perfect place for kids like me to live, and then I drew it. Maybe someday someone will build it for real." As Luna explained each feature of her design, Margot felt something crystallizing in her mind, an idea that connected her business expertise with the human problems she had been learning about through Luna's experiences. "Luna, what if I told you that someone might be interested in building something like this?" "Really? You know someone who makes buildings?" Before Margot could answer, Eli appeared in the doorway, his usually cheerful demeanor shadowed by worry. Luna immediately noticed a change in her father's expression, her own face growing serious. "Papa, what's wrong?" Eli glanced at Margot, clearly uncomfortable discussing private matters in front of someone who was still essentially a stranger, despite their growing friendship. "Just some paperwork stuff, little star. Nothing for you to worry about." But Luna's perceptiveness wouldn't be dismissed so easily. "Is it about our apartment?" The question hung in the air, and Margot saw Eli's internal struggle between protecting his daughter from adult concerns and respecting her intelligence. She also recognized an opportunity to offer help without damaging his pride. "Eli," she said carefully, "I've been learning a lot about housing challenges for families dealing with medical conditions. If there's anything I could do to help, even just connecting you with resources." "We'll manage," he said automatically, but his voice carried the strain of someone who wasn't sure how. "I know you will. But sometimes managing is easier when you have people in your corner." Luna looked between the two adults, seeming to understand more than either of them realized. "Papa, remember what Mama said about accepting help gracefully? She said it lets other people practice being kind." The wisdom of an 8-year-old, spoken in her mother's words, created a moment of silence that felt almost sacred. In that pause, 3 people who had entered each other's lives by accident began to understand that some connections transcend circumstance, creating possibilities that none of them could achieve alone. As the afternoon visit continued, an unspoken understanding began to develop. Margot had resources and business expertise. Eli had experience with the challenges that families like his faced daily. Luna had the vision to imagine solutions that adults, constrained by practical limitations, might never consider. By the time Margot left the hospital that evening, she had made a decision that would require her to choose between the safe path of conventional success and the uncertain territory of meaningful change. But for the first time in her career, the choice felt obvious. The discovery came by accident, as many revelations do. Margot was reviewing quarterly reports in her office when a colleague mentioned the medical AI division that Vale Technologies had quietly acquired 2 years ago, a small biotech company whose research had seemed tangential to their core business at the time. The acquisition had been part of a larger strategic play to diversify their technology portfolio, filed away and largely forgotten as more pressing opportunities demanded attention. Whatever happened to that respiratory monitoring project? She asked her chief technology officer during their weekly review meeting, the one that came with the MedTech acquisition. "Still in development. Actually, it's showing promising results. Dr. Patel's team has been working on predictive algorithms that could revolutionize how we monitor and treat chronic respiratory conditions in children. The potential applications are enormous." The words hit Margot like a physical force. For 2 years, while she had been focused on traditional tech products and market expansion, her own company had been developing technology that could directly impact Luna's condition and the lives of thousands of children like her. "I want a full briefing on the project," she said, trying to keep her voice steady. "Everything: research data, development timeline, projected applications." That afternoon, she found herself in a research laboratory she had never visited, despite it existing 3 floors below her executive office. Dr. Kavitha Patel, the lead researcher, greeted her with the enthusiasm of someone who rarely got to present her work to senior leadership. The respiratory monitoring system we're developing could be transformative, Dr. Patel explained, gesturing toward banks of computers and monitoring equipment. Traditional treatment approaches are reactive. We wait for symptoms to worsen before adjusting medications or interventions. Our AI system analyzes patterns in breathing, environmental factors, and physiological indicators to predict respiratory episodes before they become critical. She showed Margot charts and data streams that tracked subtle changes in breathing patterns, environmental allergens, and stress indicators that could trigger respiratory distress hours or even days before symptoms became apparent to patients or their families. For children with chronic conditions, this could mean the difference between emergency hospitalizations and proactive management. Parents would receive alerts when their child's risk factors are elevated, with specific recommendations for medication, adjustments, or environmental modifications. Margot studied the research data, her mind racing with implications. How accurate are the predictions? In clinical trials, we've achieved 87% accuracy in predicting respiratory episodes 24 to 48 hours in advance. For severe episodes requiring hospitalization, our accuracy rate climbs to 94%. The numbers are staggering. Luna's recent emergency could have been predicted and possibly prevented with this technology. Families like Eli's could move from reactive crisis management to proactive health maintenance. What's the timeline for bringing this to market? Dr. Patel's expression grew complicated. That's where we face challenges. The technology is ready for expanded clinical trials, but the regulatory approval process is expensive and time-consuming. We estimate another 3 to 5 years before general availability, assuming adequate funding for trials and FDA approval processes. How much funding are we talking about? Approximately $15 million for comprehensive clinical trials across multiple pediatric hospitals. The board allocated $2 million last year, but with other priority projects, the respiratory monitoring system has been deprioritized. Margot felt a surge of anger that surprised her with its intensity. While she had been focused on quarterly earnings and market share, life-changing technology sat underfunded in a basement laboratory. Children continued to suffer from preventable medical crises because the potential market wasn't considered large enough to justify aggressive investment. Dr. Patel, hypothetically, if we had full funding, how quickly could we move to clinical trials? 6 months to design the expanded trial protocols, another 18 months for data collection, 6 months for analysis and FDA submission. Under optimal conditions, we could have approval within 3 years. That evening, Margot sat in her apartment with financial projections spread across her dining table. The numbers told a story that both excited and terrified her. Vale Technologies had the resources to fund the respiratory monitoring project fully, but doing so would require convincing a board focused on short-term profits to invest in long-term social impact. Her phone buzzed with a text from Luna. "Papa is working late. Again. I drew you a picture of us coloring together. Can't wait to show you tomorrow." The message, so innocent and trusting, crystallized her resolve. Luna and thousands of children like her couldn't wait 3 to 5 years for technology that could transform their lives. They needed advocates willing to fight for acceleration, willing to risk conventional success for meaningful change. The next day's board meeting felt like preparing for battle. Margot had spent the night crafting a presentation that connected the respiratory monitoring project to Vale Technologies' long-term strategic interests, while emphasizing the immediate human need for the technology. The pediatric medical device market represents a $34 billion opportunity. She began, clicking through slides that showed market projections and competitive analysis. Our respiratory monitoring system could capture significant market share, while establishing Vale Technologies as a leader in medical AI applications. Board member Harrison leaned forward, his expression skeptical. "Margot, we've discussed this acquisition before. The return on investment timeline doesn't align with our growth objectives. The return on investment changes dramatically when we consider the full scope of applications, she countered. This technology isn't just about respiratory conditions. The predictive algorithms could be adapted for cardiac monitoring, diabetes management, even early detection of neurological conditions. We're not just developing a product, we're creating a platform for predictive pediatric healthcare. She clicked to the next slide, showing Dr. Patel's clinical trial data. In controlled studies, this technology has prevented 94% of severe respiratory episodes requiring hospitalization. For families dealing with chronic childhood conditions, this represents not just improved health outcomes, but dramatic reductions in medical costs and life disruption. The room grew quiet as board members absorbed the implications. Margot pressed her advantage. I'm proposing we fully fund the clinical trials, $15 million over the next 3 years, with the goal of bringing this technology to market in 36 months instead of the current 60-month timeline. That's a significant acceleration of our investment timeline, Harrison observed. What's driving this sudden urgency? The question she had been dreading. Margot could cite market pressures, competitive threats, or strategic opportunities. Instead, she chose honesty. I've been working with families affected by pediatric respiratory conditions. I've seen firsthand how current reactive treatment approaches fail these children and their parents. We have the technology and resources to change that. The question is whether we have the will. The silence that followed felt eternal. Finally, board member Sarah Chun spoke. What you're proposing represents a fundamental shift in our development priorities. Are you prepared to take personal responsibility for this project's success? Yes, Margot said without hesitation. I'm prepared to stake my position at this company on bringing this technology to the families who need it. As the meeting concluded with grudging approval for further analysis, Margot realized she had crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed. She had publicly committed her career to a project driven more by personal conviction than corporate strategy. The little girl who drew dreams in colored pencils had somehow convinced a CEO to risk everything on the possibility that business success and human compassion could coexist. That afternoon, driving toward the hospital for her weekly visit, Margot felt the weight of what she had committed to accomplish. But for the first time in her career, the pressure felt like purpose rather than burden. She was no longer just building a company, she was building hope for families who had taught her that some investments couldn't be measured in quarterly reports. The call came at 3:47 a.m. on a Thursday, piercing the darkness of Margot's apartment with the urgency that only medical emergencies could carry. She fumbled for her phone, instantly alert despite the hour, her heart racing before she even saw Eli's name on the display. Margot? His voice was strained, fighting to maintain control. I'm sorry to call so late, but she's in the ICU. Her breathing crashed about an hour ago, and they can't seem to stabilize her. The words hit like physical blows. I'm on my way. She was dressed and in her car within minutes, the empty city streets blurring past as she navigated towards St. Mary's Hospital. During the drive, her mind raced through everything Dr. Patel had told her about the respiratory monitoring system. If they had been testing the technology, if Luna had been wearing the monitoring device, would this crisis have been predicted? Could it have been prevented? The ICU waiting room at 4 a.m. was a liminal space where time seemed suspended, filled with families confronting their worst fears while clinging to fragile hope. She found Eli slumped in a plastic chair, still wearing the clothes he had thrown on when the hospital called. His face was drawn with exhaustion and terror, the kind of bone-deep fear that came from watching your child fight for every breath. How is she? Margot asked, settling into the chair beside him. They have her on a ventilator, he said, his voice hollow. Dr. Martinez says it's the most severe episode she's had. Something triggered a massive inflammatory response in her lungs. They're trying different medications, but he trailed off, unable to voice the possibilities that haunted every parent's nightmare. Margot took his hand, surprised by how natural the gesture felt. She's strong. She's going to fight through this. I keep thinking about what I could have done differently, Eli continued, his words tumbling out with the desperate need to make sense of senseless circumstances. Was it something in our apartment? The stress of the eviction notice? I've been working so many hours trying to catch up on bills. Maybe she felt abandoned. Maybe the anxiety affected her breathing. This isn't your fault, Margot said firmly. You're an incredible father. Luna knows how much you love her. But love isn't enough, is it? I can love her with everything I have, but I can't make her lungs work properly. I can't afford the best treatments. I can't even keep a roof over her head without help. The raw pain in his voice made Margot's chest tighten. Eli, what if I told you there might be a way to help predict these episodes before they become critical? He looked at her with the guarded hope of someone who had learned to distrust promises that seemed too good to be true. What do you mean? She explained about the respiratory monitoring system, Dr. Patel's research, and the clinical trials that could begin within months if properly funded. As she talked, she watched his expression cycle through disbelief, hope, and finally, desperate determination. You're saying Vale Technologies has been developing technology that could help Luna, and you didn't know? I'm saying my company has been developing technology that could help thousands of children like Luna, and I was too focused on other priorities to pay attention. But that's changing. I'm changing. Before Eli could respond, Dr. Martinez appeared. In the waiting room doorway, her scrubs rumpled from a long night of fighting to save a little girl's life. She's stabilizing, she said without preamble. We were able to reduce the inflammation, and her oxygen levels are improving. She's still sedated, but you can see her for a few minutes. The ICU was a cathedral of medical technology, filled with the rhythmic sounds of machines that breathed for patients too weak to manage on their own. Luna lay in the center of it all, looking impossibly small beneath the tangle of tubes and wires. But her chest rose and fell with mechanical precision, and the monitor showed numbers that were trending in the right direction. Eli approached the bed with the careful reverence of someone entering sacred space. Hey, little star, he whispered, touching her hand gently. Papa's here. You're going to be okay. Margot stayed back, giving them space for private conversation, but she could hear Eli's soft words of encouragement, his promises about future adventures they would share, his apologies for not being able to prevent this crisis. The love between father and daughter was palpable, transforming the clinical environment into something approaching holy ground. When they returned to the waiting room, the sun was beginning to rise over the city, painting the sky in shades of hope. Dr. Martinez joined them for a more detailed discussion about Luna's condition and treatment plan. This episode was more severe than previous ones, she explained. We need to consider more aggressive treatment options. There's an experimental therapy being tested at Children's Hospital, a combination of medication and breathing exercises that's shown promise for cases like Luna's. But it would require a 6-week residential treatment program. What does that mean, exactly? Eli asked. Luna would need to stay at the hospital for intensive treatment and monitoring. The program isn't covered by standard insurance, and the cost. Dr. Martinez hesitated, clearly uncomfortable with the financial realities that complicated medical care. It's approximately $85,000. The number hung in the air like a death sentence. Eli's face went white as he processed the impossibility of finding such resources. Even if he worked every available hour at his 3 jobs, even if he sold everything they owned, he couldn't approach that kind of money. There might be assistance programs, Dr. Martinez continued gently. Grants, charity care applications. I can connect you with our financial counselor. Margot listened to the conversation with growing fury at a system that placed financial barriers between sick children and potentially life-saving treatment. But beneath the anger was determination, and the beginning of a plan that would require her to risk everything she had built. Dr. Martinez, she said, what if cost were the factor? How quickly could Luna be enrolled in this experimental program? If we could arrange funding, I could have her transferred to Children's Hospital within 48 hours. But Ms. Vale, even with assistance programs, the financial requirements are. Let me worry about the financial requirements, Margot said, her voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to solving complex problems. Can you begin the paperwork for Luna's enrollment? Eli stared at her in shock. Margot, you can't, this is too much. I can't let you. "You're not letting me do anything," she interrupted gently. "I'm choosing to do this because Luna is remarkable. Because you're both remarkable. And because sometimes the most important investments can't be measured in quarterly reports." The conversation that followed was emotional and difficult, with Eli's pride warring against his desperate love for his daughter. Margot found herself drawing on reserves of patience and persuasion she hadn't known she possessed, explaining that helping Luna wasn't charity, but partnership, that Luna had already given her more than any payment could represent. "Besides," she said finally, "I have a business proposition for you. Vale Technologies needs someone who understands the real-world challenges that families face when dealing with chronic childhood conditions. Someone who can help us develop and test technologies that actually serve the people who need them most. I'm offering you a position as a consultant on our medical technology development team." "You're offering me a job?" Eli asked, stunned. "I'm offering you a career. Luna could be one of the first children to benefit from our respiratory monitoring system. You could help us make sure the technology actually works for families like yours, not just in laboratory conditions." As the morning progressed and Luna continued to stabilize, the three adults began planning a future that none of them could have imagined a week ago. But first, they had to navigate the immediate crisis of getting Luna into the experimental treatment program, a process that would require Margot to make financial commitments that would definitely attract the attention of her board of directors. That afternoon, as she prepared to return to the office for what might be the most important meeting of her career, Margot realized that her definition of success had fundamentally changed. Victory was no longer measured in stock prices or market share, but in the steady rise and fall of a little girl's chest, in the relief on a father's face, and in the possibility that love and determination could overcome even the most daunting obstacles. The emergency board meeting was called for 2 p.m., exactly 6 hours after Margot had authorized an $85,000 payment to Children's Hospital for Luna's experimental treatment. She knew word of the unauthorized expenditure would reach the board. Quickly, financial transactions of that magnitude triggered automatic alerts to the chief financial officer, who had undoubtedly spent the morning trying to understand why the CEO had personally guaranteed payment for a child's medical treatment. Margot sat in her office, reviewing the presentation she had hastily prepared while Luna was being transferred to Children's Hospital. The slides were different from anything she had ever presented to the board, less polished, more personal, driven by urgency rather than strategic planning. She was about to ask 12 successful business leaders to approve a decision that defied conventional corporate logic. Her assistant knocked and entered with coffee and a worried expression. "Ms. Vale, the board members are arriving. Mr. Harrison asked me to tell you that they're expecting a full explanation of this morning's single quotes S. Financial commitment. Thank you, Jennifer and Jennifer. Whatever happens in this meeting, I want you to know that working with you has been a privilege." The comment was unusual enough to make her assistant pause. "Ms. Vale, is everything all right?" "Everything is exactly as it should be," Margot replied. Surprised by how much she meant it, the boardroom felt different today, smaller, somehow, and charged with tension that had nothing to do with quarterly projections or market analysis. 12 faces looked at her with expressions ranging from confusion to barely contained anger. William Harrison, as the longest-serving board member, spoke first. "Margot, we need to understand what happened this morning. Our CFO received notification that you personally authorized payment for a medical treatment, completely unrelated to Vale Technologies' business operations. Can you explain this decision?" Margot stood at the head of the conference table, her presentation remote, steady in her hand despite the enormity of what she was about to attempt. "I authorized payment for experimental treatment for Eli Reyes, an 8-year-old girl with a chronic respiratory condition. Her father, Eli Reyes, was a candidate for a position in our facilities management department." "That explains who, but not why," Harrison continued. "Since when does Vale Technologies pay medical bills for job applicants' family members?" "Since we discovered that we've been developing technology that could prevent exactly the kind of medical crisis that Luna experienced last night." Margot clicked to her first slide, showing Dr. Patel's research data. Our respiratory monitoring system could have predicted Luna's episode 24 to 48 hours in advance. But because we've underfunded the clinical trials, this technology remains locked in our laboratories while children suffer preventable medical emergencies. Board member Sarah Chun leaned forward. Margot, while we all sympathize with this child's situation, you've made a significant financial commitment without board approval. This sets a dangerous precedent. You're right, Margot agreed. It does. Set a precedent. It sets a precedent that Vale Technologies will take responsibility for the real-world impact of our technological capabilities. That we won't hide behind bureaucratic processes when we have the power to help. She clicked to the next slide, showing the financial projections for accelerated clinical trials. I'm asking the board to formally approve a $15 million investment in accelerating our respiratory monitoring system to market. And I'm asking you to approve Eli Reyes' participation as our first beta tester, with Vale Technologies covering all medical expenses related to the testing and treatment. The silence that followed was deafening. Finally, board member David Martinez spoke. Margot, what you're proposing essentially amounts to adopting this child's medical care. That goes far beyond any reasonable interpretation of corporate social responsibility, does it? Margot challenged. We're a company that profits from technological innovation. When that innovation could save lives, don't we have an obligation to ensure it reaches the people who need it? Harrison's expression had grown increasingly stern. This emotional decision-making is exactly what we discussed in previous meetings. Leadership requires the ability to separate personal feelings from business judgment. And I'm telling you that my judgment has never been clearer, Margot replied, her voice gaining strength. Eli Reyes has taught me more about innovation, resilience, and problem-solving in 6 weeks than I learned in 20 years of business school and corporate strategy. She designed architectural plans for housing that serves families dealing with chronic medical conditions. She creates art that transforms hospital rooms into spaces of hope. She sees solutions where adults see only problems. She clicked to a slide showing Luna's drawings. This is innovation. This is the kind of creative thinking that drives breakthrough technologies. If we're serious about developing medical devices that serve real families, we need to understand what real families actually need. Board member Lisa Wong, who had been silent until now, spoke carefully. What you're describing sounds like a significant shift in our corporate mission. Are you proposing that Vale Technologies move into healthcare? Philanthropy? I'm proposing that we move into meaningful innovation, Margot replied. The pediatric medical device market represents a $34 billion opportunity, but more importantly, it represents millions of children whose lives could be improved by technology we already possess. The discussion that followed was intense and sometimes heated. Board members raised concerns about legal liability, insurance implications, precedent setting, and the potential for other families to request similar support. They questioned whether medical philanthropy aligned with shareholder interests and whether Margot's personal involvement with Luna's family compromised her judgment. Through it all, Margot maintained her position with a calm determination that surprised even her. She presented financial models showing potential return on investment for medical device development. She cited research about corporate social responsibility and long-term brand value. But underneath the business arguments was a deeper conviction that couldn't be quantified in spreadsheets. The fundamental question, she said as the debate continued, is whether Vale Technologies wants to be a company that develops technology for the sake of profit, or a company that develops technology to solve problems that matter. Luna's family has shown me the difference. At 4:30 p.m., Harrison called for a recess. Margot, we need to discuss this among ourselves. Please wait in your office. As she left the boardroom, Margot felt oddly calm, despite knowing that her career hung in the air. Balance. Her phone buzzed with a text from Eli. Luna is responding well to the new treatment. Doctors are optimistic. Thank you for making this possible. The message was followed by a photo Luna in her hospital bed, surrounded by new art supplies, working on a drawing despite the breathing mask and IV lines. Even in the sterile environment of intensive care, her indomitable spirit shone through. Margot stared at the photo, thinking about the board's concerns regarding precedent and liability. They were right. Of course, supporting Luna's treatment would set a precedent. But perhaps it was time for Vale Technologies to set a different kind of precedent, one that measured success in lives improved rather than just profits generated. Office phone rang with the call she had been expecting. "Margot, please return to the boardroom. We're ready to vote." The boardroom felt different when Margot returned. The tension had shifted from hostility to something more complex, a mixture of resignation, respect, and uncertainty about the precedent they were about to set. Harrison stood at the head of the table, his expression unreadable, as he prepared to deliver the verdict that would determine not just Margot's future, but the direction of the company she had built. "Margot, we've had extensive discussion about your proposal and your unauthorized financial commitment this morning," he began. "The board recognizes your passion for this project and your concern for this child's welfare. However, we cannot ignore the fundamental breach of corporate protocol that occurred today." Margot felt her stomach drop, but she maintained her composure. She had known this was a possibility, that choosing Luna over corporate procedure might cost her everything she had worked to build. "Therefore," Harrison continued, "the board has voted to accept your resignation as CEO of Vale Technologies, effective immediately." The words hit like physical blows, but before Margot could fully process their implications, Harrison held up his hand. "However, we have also voted to approve your proposal for accelerated clinical trials of the respiratory monitoring system, with a budget of $15 million over 3 years. And we are establishing the Eli Reyes Fellowship Program, a fund to support families participating in clinical trials of Vale Technologies medical devices." Margot stared at him in confusion. "I don't understand." Sarah Chun spoke next. "What we witnessed today wasn't just a CEO making an emotional decision. It was an innovator recognizing an opportunity that the rest of us missed. Your willingness to stake your career on a technology with genuine humanitarian impact has forced us to reconsider our priorities. But you said you accepted my resignation." "As CEO," Harrison clarified. "We're offering you a new position, Chief Innovation Officer for Medical Technologies, reporting directly to the board. Your role would be to oversee all medical device development, including the respiratory monitoring system and future technologies that could improve children's health outcomes." The offer was so unexpected that Margot needed a moment to process it. They were removing her from the traditional executive track, but creating a position that would allow her to focus entirely on the work that had become her passion. "What about Luna's treatment?" she asked. "Fully covered under the new fellowship program," Chun replied. "And her father's position as a consultant on medical technology development has been approved. We want families like theirs involved every stage of our product development process." Lisa Wong leaned forward. "Margot, what you've shown us is that our medical technologies have been developed in isolation from the people who actually need them. The respiratory monitoring system is brilliant science, but it took a child's medical crisis to make us understand its real-world urgency." As the board meeting concluded and the formal paperwork was prepared, Margot felt a strange mixture of loss and liberation. She was no longer the CEO of Vale Technologies, but she had gained something potentially more valuable, the opportunity to build technologies that could transform lives rather than just generate profits. Her first call was to Eli, who answered on the first ring despite the late hour. "How's Luna?" she asked immediately. "Responding beautifully to the treatment," he said, relief evident in his voice. "The doctors say her lung function is improving faster than they expected. She's been asking about you, wants to show you the picture she drew of her new room. I'd love to see it. And Eli, I have news about the job offer we discussed." As she explained the board's decisions, both her resignation as CEO and the approval of the medical technology program, she could hear his amazement and gratitude. "Margot, I don't know how to thank you. This changes everything for Luna, for our future." "You don't need to thank me," she replied. "Luna changed my life long before I could change hers. She taught me what it means to invest in something that truly matters." The next morning, Margot arrived at Children's Hospital to find Luna's room transformed into an art studio. She was propped up in bed, breathing more easily than Margot had seen in weeks, surrounded by new drawings that showed remarkable improvement. In both technique and optimism, Ms. Margot, Luna exclaimed, holding up her latest creation. Look, I drew our new house. It has special air filters and a garden where Papa and I can grow vegetables. And see, there's a workshop where you can invent things to help kids breathe better. The drawing was remarkably detailed, showing a house designed specifically for someone with respiratory challenges, high ceilings for air circulation, large windows for natural light, an indoor garden space for clean air production. But what touched Margot most was the inclusion of a space for her in Luna's vision of their future. It's beautiful, Luna. And I have news. Papa is going to help my company develop new technologies to help children like you stay healthy. Really? Papa's going to be an inventor? In a way, yes. He's going to help inventors like me understand what families really need. As they colored together that morning, Margot marveled at how dramatically her life had changed in just 6 weeks. She had lost a position she had worked decades to achieve, but gained a purpose that felt more meaningful than any title she had ever held. Dr. Patel arrived that afternoon with the first prototype of the respiratory monitoring device, a small, comfortable sensor that could track Luna's breathing patterns and environmental exposures in real time. Luna would be the first child to test the technology outside laboratory conditions, providing data that could accelerate approval and help thousands of other children. It's like having a guardian angel that watches over my breathing, Luna said, as Dr. Patel fitted the device. Can we give it a name? What would you like to call it? Dr. Patel asked. Luna thought for a moment and smiled. Hope, because that's what it gives people, hope that someone is always watching out for them. As the sun set over the city that evening, 3 lives that had intersected by chance found themselves bound together by choice. A little girl who had never stopped believing in happy endings had convinced a CEO to risk everything for the possibility that business success and human compassion could coexist. A father who had thought love alone might not be enough discovered that sometimes love combined with opportunity could move mountains. And in a hospital room filled with art supplies and medical equipment, hope was being redefined, not as wishful thinking, but as the courage to invest in futures that seemed impossible until someone decided to make them real. 6 months later, the morning sun streamed through the large windows of the house that Luna had dreamed into existence, painting golden rectangles across hardwood floors that no longer creaked with age and worry. Eli stood in the kitchen, a real kitchen with enough counter space for Maria's recipe book and Luna's art supplies, preparing breakfast, while his daughter's laughter echoed from the garden where she was helping Margot plant tomatoes. The respiratory monitoring device, now officially named the Hope System in Luna's honor, had exceeded everyone's expectations during clinical trials. Luna had been symptom-free for 4 months, with the device providing early warnings that allowed for proactive treatment, adjustments before episodes could develop into emergencies. More importantly, 12 other children in the pilot program had experienced similar improvements, and the FDA had fast-tracked approval based on the compelling clinical data. Papa, come see, Luna called from outside. The tomatoes are already getting bigger. He stepped onto the back porch of their new home, a modest 3-bedroom house in a quiet neighborhood with good schools and clean air, purchased with Eli's new salary as Director of Family Advocacy for Vale Technologies Medical Division. His official title was impressive, but his real job was simpler. Make sure that every medical device the company developed actually served the families who would depend on it. In the garden, Luna knelt beside Margot, both of them covered in soil, and completely absorbed in the serious business of nurturing seedlings. The sight still amazed Eli, his daughter, and the former CEO of a billion-dollar company, united in their shared enthusiasm for coaxing life from the earth. Look, Papa. Luna held up a small green tomato. Ms. Margot says that in 2 months, we'll have enough for salsa and spaghetti sauce, and maybe even some to give to Mrs. Chun. Their elderly neighbor had become Luna's unofficial grandmother, stopping by weekly to admire new artwork and share stories about her own childhood in China. The sense of community that had been missing from their old apartment had gradually Developed here, built on the foundation of people who looked out for each other simply because it was the right thing to do. The garden is looking magnificent, Eli said, accepting a dirt-covered hug from Luna, just like the artist who designed it. Over the past months, Luna's artwork had evolved from hopeful dreams to detailed plans for the future. Her latest project was an architectural proposal for the new pediatric wing at Children's Hospital, UTS, space designed by someone who understood what children facing medical challenges actually needed. The hospital's board had been so impressed with her vision that they had hired a professional architect to translate her drawings into buildable plans. "Miss Margot, are you staying for lunch?" Luna asked. "Papa's making his famous grilled cheese sandwiches." "I wouldn't miss it," Margot replied, standing and brushing soil from her jeans. "But first, I have something special to show you both." She retrieved a folder from her car, not unlike the folder that Luna had originally sent with Eli to his job interview. But this one was professionally bound and labeled Hope System Clinical Trial Results, Final Report. Inside were charts and graphs that told a story of remarkable success: 94% reduction in emergency hospitalizations, 87% improvement in quality of life measures, and 100% satisfaction among participating families. But the most meaningful section wasn't the statistical analysis, it was the testimonials from parents whose children had benefited from early intervention warnings, from families who could finally plan activities without constant fear of medical emergencies. "This technology is going to help thousands of children," Margot explained as they reviewed the data together. "And it all started because one little girl was brave enough to draw her dreams, and one father was courageous enough to choose love over opportunity." "I didn't choose love over opportunity," Eli corrected gently. "I discovered that love was the opportunity." After lunch, as they often did on Saturdays, the three of them drove to the new Vale Technologies Medical Research Center. The building itself was unremarkable, a converted warehouse in an industrial district, but the work being done inside was revolutionary. Dr. Patel's team had expanded beyond respiratory monitoring to develop predictive systems for a range of childhood medical conditions, always with input from families who understood the daily realities of chronic illness. Luna had her own space in the research center, a small office where she could draw and dream while her father attended meetings or consulted on device design. Her walls were covered with architectural plans for hospitals, schools, and community centers designed to serve children with special needs. What had started as childhood artwork had evolved into practical blueprints for a more inclusive world. "Luna, I have a surprise for you," Margot said as they entered the research center. "Remember your drawing of the perfect pediatric hospital wing? The one with the healing gardens and the art therapy rooms?" "Of course. Did someone like it?" "Someone loved it so much that they're building it. Construction starts next month on the Eli Reyes Pediatric Wellness Center at Children's Hospital. It's going to be exactly like your drawings, designed to help children heal not just their bodies, but their spirits." Luna's face went through a series of expressions: surprise, disbelief, and finally, pure joy that seemed to illuminate the entire room. "They're really building my hospital? The one I drew?" "Every detail," Margot confirmed. "From the indoor trees to the art stations in every room. And there's going to be a plaque by the main entrance that says, 'Designed by Eli Reyes, Architect of Hope.'" As Luna danced around the room, her excitement infectious, Eli and Margot exchanged looks that spoke of shared amazement at how far they had all traveled from that desperate afternoon in a corporate lobby. That evening, as sunset painted the sky in shades of possibility, they sat on the front porch of the house that had grown from Luna's dreams. The neighborhood was settling into its evening rhythm, children being called in for dinner, porch lights beginning to glow, the kind of ordinary domestic peace that Eli had once thought was beyond their reach. "Papa," Luna said, settling into the space between her father and Margot on the porch swing, "do you think Mama would be proud of our adventures?" Eli wrapped his arms around his daughter, his voice thick with emotion. "I think Mama would be amazed by the strong, creative, compassionate person you've become. And I think she would love how our family has grown." Luna looked at Margot with the kind of matter-of-fact acceptance that children brought to life's surprising turns. "Ms. Margot, you know you're part of our family now, right?" Not because of paperwork or anything official, but because of love and choosing to take care of each other. Margot felt tears she hadn't expected gathering in her eyes. "I would be honored to be part of your family, Luna." As the first stars appeared in the darkening sky, three people who had found each other through chance and stayed together through choice reflected on the journey that had brought them to this moment of peaceful contentment. The simple gold band that Eli still wore caught the porch light, but it no longer felt like a symbol of loss. Instead, it represented the enduring power of love to create new beginnings from the ashes of old endings. Luna's breathing was steady and strong, monitored by technology that would soon help thousands of other children. But sustained by something far more powerful than any device, the love of people who had chosen to see her, not as a medical case or a charity project, but as a complete person worthy of every dream she dared to imagine. In the distance, the city. Lights twinkled like fallen stars, and somewhere among them, other families were facing their own challenges with the same mixture of fear and hope that had once defined Eli and Luna's daily existence. But now there was something new in the world: technology built with compassion, solutions designed by people who understood problems personally, and proof that sometimes the most unexpected connections could create the most profound transformations. Future stretched ahead of them, full of possibility and promise, guided by the wisdom that Luna had carried with her from the beginning, that every day held something good if you looked for it. That love multiplied when shared, and that dreams, drawn in colored pencils, could reshape the world if someone had the courage to believe they were worth building.